As real estate observers debate a possible housing bubble in Canada's largest urban area, people already in search of a home say that the pre-pandemic affordability crisis has only gotten worse. But if the problem has been recognized for some time already, why hasn't supply increased enough to stabilize prices? With us now on what part neighborhoods and zoning play in this story, we welcome, from her office at City Hall in the heart of Ontario's capital, Paula Fletcher, City Councillor for Toronto Danforth. In the Kingsview Village neighbourhood, Cheryl Case, founder and principal urban planner at CP Planning and co-editor of House Divided, How the Missing Middle Will Solve Toronto's Housing Crisis. In Seton Village, also a co-editor of House Divided, there's Alex Bezikovic, architecture critic for the Globe and Mail. And in the Humewood area of the city, Joe Mihevc, who was a councillor in Toronto from 1991 to 2018 and is now a visiting professor at York University. And it's great to welcome you four onto TVO tonight. Let me start with the one of us who is elected, and then we'll go to the one of us who was elected for the first shots at this question. There's a lot of outrage in Toronto, I guess a couple of weeks ago, about some opposition to an affordable housing project that was going to take place in a parking lot that one resident described as the hub and the heart of the community. Okay, let's find out. How common has this type of objection been? Councillor Fletcher, you first, in your experience.
This is quite common. This was a modular housing site, supportive housing for men coming off the street, have been homeless and looking for a solid place to live with great supports. I think change is always hard, but I know from my experience that while there's people that are opposed, there are always a lot of people, institutions, churches, schools, many other community leaders that are in favor. As a matter of fact, on Queen Street, when Wood Green built First Steps to Homes, which was in a former hotel, and they had someone go in the community to talk about how important it is to house these folks, there was a housewarming party, and the neighbors all delivered toaster ovens, sheets, silverware, many things for these men moving into a stable housing situation. So I think sometimes it's how you go about it, Steve.
Joe Mihevc, can I get you to weigh in on this issue as well? But from this standpoint, do we have these kinds of issues only when you're trying to house, say, a difficult to house cohort, or do you get this kind of stuff regardless?
Oh, you almost get it regardless. And as Paula Fletcher was just saying, change is hard for some people, and it gets articulated in sometimes very unhealthy ways. In all my days, and this goes back to the early 90s, I cannot remember a case where there hasn't been some kind of community opposition to either an affordable housing project or a social housing project or a shelter going in. Having said that, at the same time, there has not been, I'm pretty sure, 99.9% sure, that I've never seen a case where city council or staff have backed off and said, okay, we will follow the advice or the NIMBYism that is presenting itself and go in a different direction. We have always, under Lastman, under Miller, under Ford, under Tory, the affordable housing, social housing, shelter project has always won at the end of the day. But there is a process, and some processes are healthier and some processes are not so healthy in attaining community acceptance.
Yeah, you mentioned NIMBYism, and just for those who don't follow this stuff all that carefully, NIMBY, not in my backyard. That is the reference to what we're talking about here. Cheryl Case, let me get you in here. I think most people would understand that if you wanted in a relatively not dense neighborhood, if somebody wanted to put up a 50-story condo in the middle of a neighborhood full of bungalows, okay, we get that. We understand what the neighborhood opposition to that would be. But setting that aside, how difficult is it, in your experience, to even see gentle density, duplexes, triplexes, 4-story buildings put up in neighborhoods?
Well, it's actually quite incredibly difficult, and it's a funny thing that it is so difficult because you're seeing actually a lot of change happening in these single-family neighborhoods. In my neighborhood here in Kingsview Village, every time I go on a walk, I see a new bungalow that's been torn down and in process to being built into a 2-story, huge home, right? Like the type of home that you would only dream to live in and have an excess of space living in. where these types of housing are permitted to be, redeveloped into two-story single-family houses. You can't take that same bungalow and turn it into a multi-family housing opportunity. And the reason for that is really ingrained into our planning culture in Ontario.
Tell me what you mean by that. The planning culture refers to what?
So the planning culture, I think to go first, I'll say that, the average person consulted in a planning consultation is a homeowner, right? They're the ones who are being consulted around planning. And actually, as we've been developing a planning practice for the last 100 years, it's been the homeowner who's been given the priority. So to give you an example of how this has played out in our history, in the 40s and 60s is when a lot of the suburban neighborhoods in Toronto were established, and a lot of the very restrictive zoning regulations were established as well. And so I'll tell you a story about Thorncrest in here in Etobicoke. If you think about it, it's in the Eglinton and Rathburn area here. And so as this neighborhood was being established and being built out, it was being built solely for single family housing. And that was its selling point. And in this neighborhood, you actually had to apply to purchase housing. And you look into the things that people were writing as they were applying to buy the housing there. They were writing in, my neighborhood is being, a lot of immigrants are moving into my neighborhood. A lot of working class people are moving into my neighborhood. And they essentially were trying to escape that type of social mixing. And that's the foundation of our planning. The planning process enabled that type of social and class segregation, and has essentially allowed that to be ingrained into the minds of these community members, that this is their entitlement. It's their entitlement to live separate from lower income people.
Okay, understood. Let's, Sheldon, would you mind bringing up this graphic here, top of page 2? And Alex, I'll give you the first kick at this one, and then I want to hear Councillor Fletcher on as well, because it's actually her neck of the woods we're talking about. This is from a tweet. It references population change from 1971 to 2016 for the census tracts immediately north and south of Danforth between Broadview and Victoria Park. And we see, I guess for people who are listening on podcast, I'll just describe this a little bit, the red shaded areas on the western end and the gray shaded areas on the eastern end of that area that we're looking at. The population of Toronto grew 3 times in that time span, 71 to 2016. And that area on the Danforth has some of the highest so-called walk scores, transit scores, and cycling scores. And then when the Relief subway line is built, well, some of it under, some of it over, I guess, called the Relief line, it'll service part of that area too. There's not many parts of this city that are more connected than that. Alex, how did all that happen?
Well, the trend that we see there is one that's happened across Toronto, it's happened across Vancouver, it's happened across basically every major city in North America over the last 50 years. Our demographics have changed, and the way in which we live has changed. When you think about the families of our parents and grandparents' generation, they tended to have more kids. It was very common for those who owned homes to have tenants or boarders in their houses. And in Toronto, and particularly in the neighborhoods around downtown, those neighborhoods were less wealthy, and a lot of the buildings that are houses now were divided up into apartments. So you put all that stuff together, and a single building that a generation ago might have housed 6 or even 8 or even 10 people might very well house 3 or 4 right now. So even while we see some new housing being built, the occasional condo here and there, although not on the Danforth, the shrinkage in household size and the fact that each of us is taking up more space means that the buildings we have just don't hold as many people.
Councillor Fletcher, can I get you to speak to the angle on this, that we see a part of the city here that does, I mean, obviously you represent this part of the city, so I know you're going to say it's fantastic. And it is in so many ways, right? Good public transit, cycling ability. As a general rule, you don't get the kind of traffic that races through. It's pretty nice and walkable, that area as well. But you don't exactly see an intensification of living space there. How come?
Well, a couple of things I found that interesting about this, Steve. And I had a constituent call me who'd put out of the cold programs in at different churches, and she said, "Oh, Paul, in our neighborhood, these homes that were multi-tenanted are all being turned over now for single families." And I think that's happening somewhat in this neighborhood as well as in Parkdale. Also, what I find interesting is that densification is taking place much more on the streetcar line down on Queen Street than on the subway line on the Danforth. It's one of the reasons why we're doing a planning study for the Danforth between Coxwell and Broadview. It's underway now, and one was done between Coxwell and Victoria Park, which has identified a number of sites for intensification. I think that the Danforth is just missing the densification around the station. So as you mentioned, Steve, with the relief line, Pape Station will have to be densified. There's some major station transit assessments are being done for all of those stations. And the other thing I find interesting is that owners on the Danforth just are not that interested in selling and building up. And you can't force somebody to do that. So with the planning study, we're just going to talk about what's possible, what we can make, how high you can go, what do we want. But I've also added into that planning study something that doesn't go into planning studies very often, and that is affordability has to get baked into any permissions that we can have on the Danforth.
All right, but having said all that, Alex, does the plan for that area, I mean, even if you wanted to put up, let's say, a 10-story condo right near a subway station, the zoning does not allow that, I don't think, does it?
Well, this is the tricky thing. There are always complexities to this sort of thing. Planning and zoning, the sort of specific regulations for each site, are always complicated, and they're complicated in ways that make it hard to build apartment buildings, without exception. So the City of Toronto, in this particular stretch of Danforth Avenue, has called it what it calls an avenue. So it's a commercial street. And the city has decided that new buildings of some size are allowed to go on the Danforth, on this street itself, but they're not allowed to go on any of the streets adjacent to it. So, and not only is that the case, that all of the growth is limited to one particular street, but by the time you get to a building that's 10 or 12 stories tall, it starts to cast shadows on the buildings behind it. And those are houses, and that's forbidden. Buildings start to have what's called overlook. So someone from the upper stories can look down on the house neighborhood behind it. And that also is forbidden. You know, long story short, the regulations that would allow you to build apartment buildings in this on top of a subway station make it very, very difficult once you get into the details. And the city is not doing a meaningful job of changing that. In fact, this new plan that Councillor Fletcher is talking about is going to continue that status quo to make it very, very difficult to build buildings of any size here.
Okay, Joe, let's continue the story this way then. We see a part of the city which is very livable, a very desirable neighborhood, very little density. Many people believe it could take a lot more intensification given the amount of transit and how nice the lifestyle is there. And yet you go to some other parts of the capital city, maybe up by York University. Maybe if you go east to Scarborough, not nearly as much public transit in those locations, not walkable at all. Cars flying by at great speeds, so not necessarily a safe place to cycle either. And there is tremendous growth, and zoning allows for tremendous growth. Can you explain all that to us?
Well, in the suburbs, what you're seeing is the new immigrants are moving to the suburbs. And so what we saw downtown and in the old East York, and you know, my family is a great example of what Alex was speaking about. Parents, 5 kids, and then we rented the basement, and then my cousin moved in. And, you know, it was actually a pretty good way of living. We learned pluralism. We learned how to respect one another. We learned how to share. There's a whole bunch of social skills that you learn when you live like the majority of the rest of the world lives, and that is in extended and different matrices of family. Those families are here in Toronto. Extended families, but they're in the suburbs, and they are buying up those bungalows. Some of those single-family neighborhood areas. That's where the new immigrants that are in a position to buy, that are getting money from aunt and uncle and a variety of people, and they're moving in, in groups of 10, 15 people into those areas. That's one reason why they're intensifying, and of course it's cheaper land, and it's a cheaper land because it's further away from work, and it's further away from public transit. There are a number of development applications also that are coming along the major arteries near subway stations in those areas as well, and that's accounting for the increase in population in the Scarboroughs and the Rexdales and in the Jane Finches of Toronto.
Well, again, Cheryl, I'm going to ask you to explain something about why this makes sense. And I mean, we're here at this studio at the corner of Yonge and Eglinton. There's an $6 billion LRT going in here. We've had the Yonge Street subway line here for 70 years. I get why there's $2 billion worth of condo construction going on, 2 steps outside the front door here at TVO. What I'm a little less clear about is they've had a subway line on Danforth also for half a century, if not more. And yet we don't see any of these large construction projects going up. And we know there are lots of people who want to live there. Why isn't it happening?
So that's something I'd have to look into the census data to tell you, if I'm honest, actually, because what's the difference between Yonge and Eglinton and the Danforth? Yonge and Eglinton has been known as young and single, or what was the
Young
term
and eligible.
Young and eligible, right? So I'm curious what the demographics are there. Like, are there more renters at that intersection? Are the parcels of land larger? Are there more homeowners in East York? I know that, for example, in the area where the modular housing is going up, only about 20% of the neighborhood is renters. So that shows to be a bit of an indication to me that maybe there is more homeownership going on in that area. That's, I think, something that maybe Paula Fletcher would be able to answer to more than I would.
Yeah, good idea. Paula, can you tell us whether or not, could you build a 50-story condo somewhere near the Pape subway or the Chester subway on Danforth?
Well, we're looking at that right now. I just want to say that at Broadview, there's a fair amount of density. At Main and Danforth, there's a fair amount of density. And at Greenwood, we've got density. At Woodbine, there's an application in for, I think it's about a 31-story condo. So it's coming, and the density will be greater than on the streetcar lines. But in our Danforth study, and I do say I have a 9-story condo going on at Greenwood and Danforth, Alex, which was a large site, as Cheryl's talked about having a site big enough. That was a beer store. So a lot of the beer stores are now turning over into developments. But in our Danforth study, there's a very interesting piece that I think contributes to the missing middle, which is at, there's the zone where all the parking lots are over top of the subway line, and is to have some gentle density coming onto those parking lots in behind the houses from the laneways. And I think it's pretty exciting. We're out there talking about it now. So there's many types of density to be added, and I think the missing middle is really incredibly important, and that's why we have the pilot going on right now in Ward 19 to look at how to do that, particularly soft, gentle density that people really shouldn't be opposed to, although I'm finding they are opposed to even soft and gentle density.
Well, opposition. Let's talk about that for a second, because that raises the issue of the quote-unquote character of a neighborhood. And Alex, you wrote about this in the Globe, and I'm going to read an excerpt from your piece, and then we'll come back and chat. This idea of character is both toxic and vague. It was born a century ago out of naked prejudice against racialized people, renters, and any household arrangement that didn't include husband, wife, and children. Somehow this legacy is still with us. Brought along by the planning profession during the post-war era, it has shaped the attitudes and expectations of people, especially homeowners, for 2 generations now. Alex, just expand on that a bit, if you would. The character of a neighborhood and how that can sometimes be awfully nefarious.
So character is one of these planning jargon words that is very loosely defined and very subjective. But basically what it means is that you can't put a new building in a place that doesn't look more or less like the buildings that we already have. And again, as you suggested in the quote that you read, that has roots in ideas 100 years old that apartments are somehow not appropriate places for families, or that the right kind of people or the right kind of citizen, will live in a house. I don't think there are many people either in the planning profession or at City Hall, anywhere, who would agree with that today. And yet the basic thrust of what we have here still shows up in Toronto as it does in other places. The character of the house neighborhoods along the Danforth is seen as sacred. You can't, buy 3 houses along the Danforth, combine them, and put up an apartment building, which is exactly what happened in neighborhoods such as the Annex in Toronto half a century ago, and made those neighborhoods, more less economically segregated, more heavily populated, more diverse than they are today, because that idea of character, which locks the neighborhood down, is applied to house neighborhoods, and it's applied unequally. It winds up being a tool for people who have the most political power to say no.
Cheryl, when you hear the expression, the character of the neighborhood, what kind of a bell does that ring for you?
I just want to first give Alex some snaps for that quote. I think we need to have more white people also in places of privilege, and with a voice to say these things, because this is a fact. There are receipts, there's evidence that this is the root of the way that planning is done, and it is unfortunately the way it's still being done today. And so when I hear, that this term of character being an excuse for not progressing towards a planning culture that actually is able to meet the housing needs of our residents, I say, okay, whatever. I'm going to go and work with people who are actually focused on providing affordable housing to all their community members. And that includes, there are many homeowners who are invested in the well-being of their neighbors and other lower income neighbors as well, as Paula Fletcher has mentioned, right? There are many people who are not given a center stage to talk about these things. And so that's what I really focus on in my work, is working with those people who are looking to build the future that we need and that we deserve.
Joe, let's take, though, the most benign interpretation of the word character of the neighborhood. And let's understand what your job when you were a city councilor, what it was. In some respects, you are there to represent the aspirations and interests of the people who already live in your ward, while at the same time understanding that more people want to move into your ward and need places to live. And in some respects, they don't live there yet, so you don't necessarily represent their interests yet. How do you as a councillor balance those competing interests?
Well, you do have to take people through a process, and that's good politics is good community development work. And it starts early, and it starts with lots of conversation, and it starts with bringing together people that need to speak with one another. So people who are perhaps against the proposed development, people who are for the development, young people, older people. You have to reach out to make sure that the table that you're part of includes voices that often aren't heard. And it has been my experience, and I would certainly push this as well to any new councillor, is to engage that process. And usually when you engage the process, you don't overcome all of the opposition, but you do bring people along and you help them to understand the kinds of pressures and desires and visions that you can have in a neighborhood. At the end of the day, what we want to do is create healthy, vibrant, diverse being a key word, a neighborhood. And that's also part of the official plan, that we don't have all the rich people here and all the poor people there, but that each neighborhood has the variety of the stuff of what makes urban areas vital. And if you think through that process with communities, usually they find that they land, not everybody, there's always going to be a little opposition, and that's where you have to have political courage to just say, we're not going to let the status quo be. Usually people will come along and see the better wisdom in having this diversity.
Well, Councillor Fletcher, let me get you on that, because on the one hand, you've got to represent the people who voted for you and who live there now. On the other hand, there are a lot of people who want to live on the Danforth, and they want you to represent them as well. How do you handle that?
I think a lot of people that live around the Danforth really want some density on the Danforth. They always say, why does Queen Street have all that density and going up? And why does it look European and feel European, and the Danforth feels like it's not? It's from a different era, just of 2 stories. So I do think that there's a real willingness. I do find that the owners on the Danforth aren't as willing to put those properties up, and there's not as many large sites. And Cheryl really hit the nail on the head there in having a large enough site to get enough density. So I'll just go, Alex knows well about Don Somerville's site. It was a site I took on when we had the changes in the boundary. And it was coming to me with 120 rent geared to income and about 600 condos. I felt that was not a good enough mix and sent everybody back. They were very angry at me to go back and add in 100 new affordable units, 125 rental, because not everybody can afford to buy, put under the rental under co-op, and replace the Toronto community housing sites. So we have to have an approach that says every time we're doing something, we want to have as much diversity in people, in incomes, and our planning regimen, Alex is right, it doesn't speak to that at the moment. I think that's what Joe's talking about, the courage to say, when we're going to redo something, we're going to redo this so it meets everybody's needs. Toronto Community Housing has huge sites. Lawrence Heights is 100 acres. Regent Park, 69 acres. How much new affordable has been added in there? Not enough. So I come from the point of view that if we're going to do something, let's have something socially important take place as well. I think the Danforth's ready for that. I think people on the Danforth are ready. And the planning study, I hope, will be a catalyst to getting that going west of Coxwell.
Well, Alex, maybe you can help us figure this out. There are people who obviously who live in these neighborhoods for a relatively short space of time. Maybe they live there 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, in neighborhoods that have been there for a century. Why do they get such an outsized say for what's going to happen in these neighborhoods going ad infinitum into the future?
Well, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. They vote. They are people who vote for people like Councillor Fletcher, and potential tenants who are going to move into the neighborhood do not vote. So that's one very basic fact. And the neighborhoods that have political pull are the neighborhoods that get to push back on new growth. The other thing that's important to understand is that it's not a given that we have a system like we do today, where every new building has to jump through hoops for years, and where neighbors effectively have veto power over every new development that happens in the city. I mean, if you go back half a century in Toronto, the apartment buildings that now house close to half of the city, a lot of those were built by buying a group of houses, tearing them down, and building a new building that houses 100 times more people. My immigrant grandparents got evicted from their house on Marley Road in the late 60s for a new apartment building that now houses, at least 700 or 800 people. That idea of displacing people is not necessarily great, but where we see that happening, that kind of change, the big change where houses get replaced by apartment buildings, it's only happening in neighborhoods that are marginalized. It is not happening in the house neighborhoods in places like the Danforth or in house neighborhoods like my own.
Well, Cheryl, we're asking this question, of course, because if you look at the population expectation numbers over the next, say, decade and a half or so, 2.5 decades, well, let's hear. I've got the number here. By the year 2046, if we take the kind of population increases that the Greater Toronto Area has been seeing, we're going to have a population in this area of nearly 10 million people. That is enormous. And my question is, can we, given the way we currently plan cities, given the kind of density people seem to be comfortable with at the moment, which is to say not all that much in some places, can we actually accommodate that kind of growth without paving over the greenbelt, without taking over other agricultural land in the area, without changing the quote-unquote character of current neighborhoods? Can all that get done?
I strongly do believe so. And that's why I'm actually very happy to be a part of the housing lab with Jennifer Kiesma and CMHC, where we're looking into just these types of problems, looking at building relationships between members of community who at one point maybe have opposed each other in terms of, who's able to live in this neighborhood, what types of housing is able to be built in this neighborhood, and building these community relationships and exploring where can we build housing that's not just about building in large sites, because frankly, we don't have enough large sites to put all the affordable housing there. We need to be building missing middle housing. We need to be building housing across neighborhoods. And this is not just about affordable housing. This is about having healthy neighborhoods, right? We talked about how some parts of these neighborhoods, they're seeing the population decline, they're seeing schools closing, and that's not really where we need to be going. And so I think this is something that, to look forward to is around this, this lab and some of the results that we'll be putting forward in the next couple of months around building relationships with members of community of all lived experience as renters, homeowners, longtime residents, new immigrants, and really designing together our path forward.
Joe, you want to follow on that?
I think it's possible.
Yes, I do think that there's been a lot of progress in the last, 30 years since amalgamation, especially around identifying the corridors where there's good public transit. That's a key area where we have to put a lot of density. And so I think the trend line would be that opposition to particular buildings and major corridors, Bathurst and Bloor is a good one, the old Honest Ed site. That wasn't a major fight the way it might have been maybe 20, 25 years ago. Where I think the nub of the issue is, and that's why the book that Alex and Cheryl edited is so important, where the fight is going to be in the next little while is precisely that gentle density. It's just to see in residential communities where the single family home was idealized with mom and pop and 2.2 kids and a white picket fence that went to the suburbs and then came downtown. Whether we're open as a city to seeing that, you know what, triplexes belong here, fourplexes, sixplexes belong here, where you can have different types of urban forms in what before was not permitted. Now the conversation is maybe some of the density to allow that 10 million person growth to happen in this area is going to happen in these single family areas, which actually predominate the geography of the city of Toronto. Maybe that's a good housing form, and maybe it's also a good living form as well, to reconnect and stop the individualization of us, the bachelor apartment. That really doesn't put us in contact with one another enough. Whereas the old form that predated World War II, that many of us grew up with if we came as new immigrants, to allow housing to facilitate those kinds of extended family forms. I think that's something that will be the big debate in the next little while. And I know City Council in Toronto has some reports coming forward that will challenge those paradigms and bring us up into the gentle density paradigm.
Well, Councillor Fletcher, let me put a controversial idea on the table, which we know the current provincial government likes a lot. MZOs, Ministerial Zoning Orders. This is where, at the request of council most of the time, the Minister of Municipal Affairs simply overrides whatever opposition there may be to increasing density in an area and says it's going to happen. I know there's a lot of controversy around that. I know there are a lot of people who don't like Steve Clark, who's the minister. They don't like his use of MZOs. But is that, in your view, a potential instrument to overcome NIMBYism?
What's interesting is that the 4 sites for the modular housing are all being done through MZOs. The first 2 sites, one in Scarborough and one in Davenport, and then the next 2, one in Willowdale and one in East York. Council just last month asked the minister for an MZO in order for that to be done quickly in order to get people off the street. I will note that the member of parliament from Willowdale sent a letter saying don't use the MZO for that supportive housing. In other words, wanting to people zone can't have a homeless moving into the neighborhood. So I think that we've stepped up in that way. I want to just talk about the pilot and how important the pilot is for the missing middle. And the pilot being that in Ward 19, looking at sites where that can be gentle density. There's one that went to the Committee of Adjustment and was actually turned down by the Committee of Adjustment. So we have to quickly get to a point where city policy says we are looking for that gentle density. These things are okay to happen because I don't think we're there. So this pilot's coming back, I think in April or May, to hear how that's going along. And I've seen the decision of the committee. It's very odd. It's basically neighbors saying no. And that becomes the NIMBY issue. So to my mind, always going out and talking to people about why we need more housing, why it has to be diverse, why we need affordability, why we need to raise up the density in a gentle way is the way to win these things, and find people that agree with us, find people that want to do that. I know I'm just going to go back to Don Somerville, which added a lot of density, but we went to the community first and had the conversation particularly about affordable housing. There's nobody in Toronto that doesn't talk about affordable housing. So I think missing middle is important. Adding gentle density, more density, including affordability, are all things that are on our plate right now, including with the city's big Housing Now plan, which is very bold. And I think we're in a housing term at this council. 2018 to 2022, that's the term when City Council turns its mind to housing of all kinds, increasing it, increasing the affordability, increasing rentability, so it's not just condos, and making sure people have a place to live, and being bold and courageous.
Alex, last 30 seconds to you on whether or not the Minister of Municipal Affairs should use MZOs to overturn the notion that only single-family dwellings can live within, 500 meters of a subway station, let's say.
Well, an MZO is, a particular tool, and it can be used for good and it can be used for evil. I think the better approach that the province should take is to push the City of Toronto, particularly, and also other municipalities, into updating their plan and updating their zoning, because the plan that we have now does not support the values that we claim to hold as a city. And that's true for other municipalities as well. We need to do a reset. We need to get a new set of plans and a new set of bylaws in place that actually allow growth, allow it in a lot of places, allow it without a lot of jumping through hoops, and then we might actually achieve some of these wonderful things that we all aspire to.
Our thanks to Alex Bezikovic, Joe Mihevc, the former city councillor, Paula Fletcher, the current city councillor, and Cheryl Case. Good of all four of you to join us on TVO for this discussion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great
Thank
conversation.
you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.